Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. It's kind of an exciting day. I am using up the last page in this sketchbook. This is the Arteza 9x12 sketchbook. I really like this one. I did notice some people mention that with the Arteza watercolor sketchbooks, they've had some uneven sizing on some of the pages, but I have been mostly lucky with my sketchbooks. I'm starting off just by sketching a portrait here, and I will link the reference photo down below. It's from Unsplash, and I think it's just called like Smiling Girl. I'm using some Derwent pencils just to sketch on. These are the graphic pencils, which are just like, graphite. And what I did was I kind of shave away a bunch of the wood, so I just have the lead exposed. And I just find it's kind of a nice way to sketch. It just kind of keeps you loose. You don't have to stop to resharpen. And I just saw another YouTuber use it, like sharpen their pencils that way. And I thought I'm going to do that since I had this extra set of the Derwent graphic pencils. I think they came in a Smart Art box. So, I basically just, draw my oval for the face and kind of I divide it up, put a line down the middle where the nose is going to be, and then divide it up into, basically thirds. I get the eyes are about halfway through the oval, and then the nose are halfway between the chin and the eyes, and then the center line dividing the lips would be between the chin and the nose. And that's kind of how I partition out the faces usually. And after I got my pencil lines in really light, I just went in with a darker line so that I could add some splashy watercolor and still see my lines while I was painting. I didn't really have much planned for this portrait, really. I didn't even know if I was going to post it, but I figured I might as well turn on the camera while I was playing around with this. I had a very busy week where I was working on a freelance project, and I just needed to kind of unwind and relax and paint a little bit. The paints that I'm using are from my signature set with Jerry's Artorama. It's the Lucas watercolor set, and you get a set of brushes and you get 24 watercolors as well as a block of Fabriano Artistico paper, or they may send Arches if they run out of the Fabriano. Those are both excellent papers. And we put together a kit there so we could have a nice, high quality, affordable set for painters to try. The Lucas palette versus like the Turner palette, because I have a signature Turner set and a signature Lucas set. The way I kind of like differentiate those two paints is that the Lucas set is much more muted and it feels more like a traditional watercolor. Whereas the Turner set has more, the colors are more punchy and vibrant and transparent. They're a little bit more of a modern watercolor set, in my feeling anyway. But they're both, either one will give you really good results. And I thought with a portrait, I love using my Lucas watercolors anytime I'm doing portrait or figurative work because it's just so easy to mix those skin tones. I mean, all you got to do is take some yellow ochre, take a little bit of a cool red, add a little burnt sienna to it. If you need to cool it or darken it, add some more ultramarine. Now, I went in pretty dark with that shadow next to the hand because I personally like to get dark values in first, but I kind of forgot that the Arteza watercolor sketchbook is not super sized, so it's sized enough to keep your marks from feathering and to keep the paint from leaking through to the other side, but to reactivate and spread those colors around, it does not work as well as the other papers that I'm used to using. So I did end up with a really harsh shadow there, but that's all right because I knew that's going to be a real dark area and it will help give me that kind of reference point of where my darkest colors are and then where my lightest colors are going to be. Now, one thing that because I'm voicing this over after the fact because I didn't know if I was going to post it or not, one thing that I forgot to give her freckles. So I might have to go back in my sketchbook and actually put freckles on her. And if I do, I'll share a photo of it on my blog. But I'm like, oh shoot, I forgot to give her freckles. Because I was just kind of fooling around and I wasn't I had no expectations for this piece. And since I was working on a pretty big freelance project where I was designing papers and stamps and dies for a company, I was like, I need something that I can just relax and have fun with and play and just, basically throw some paint at the paper and have a good time. And so that's what I was doing here. There you can see I'm literally splashing the page. Sometimes I like to do that. I like to wet an area and then just splash paint on it and then see where the paint does and where it goes. Of course, it's only going to really bleed and flow where the paper's wet, so you have that bit of control. So it's not going to go just like completely crazy everywhere on your paper. This brush here is called a liner, and it's like a small round brush, but it's got very long bristles. And the reason that it's called a liner is that you can make really long lines with it because it holds a lot of paint because those bristles are so long. So it's really nice if you're doing grasses or hair, or if you're doing like striping, like say you're a nautical painter and you want to do the riggings on a boat and the striping on a boat and all the mast, all those ropes that they have. I guess it's riggers. Sometimes the brushes are called riggers as well because nautical painters would use them. So it's really good for those situations. Now the brushes that are in my signature set are faux fur. They are not real fur. They are the Mimic Squirrel, which you may think, oh, squirrel. No, the Mimic line of brushes in my sets and also at Jerry's Autorama, those are all faux. So they have the Mimic Squirrel, which is my favorite. They have the Mimic Kolinsky, which are more expensive. They're to be similar to Kolinsky brushes, but I prefer the Squirrel. They hold more water and more paint, but they have both of those. The Kolinskys are a little bit more expensive and they're a little firmer. They've got a little more spring to them. They also have Mimic Hogs, which I have in my water mixable oil painting set with Jerry's. Those are really great. They're quite resilient, and they are to mimic the hog bristle brushes that oil painters usually use, and they're quite resilient. I've been using regular hog brushes for a long time before I found the Mimics because the synthetics would just break down so quickly. I'm like, well, I'm throwing brushes away more often, so how can that be good for the environment? You know what I mean? But I found that the Mimic Kolinskys and the Mimic Squirrels are very long lasting, as well as the Mimic Hogs. And if you want a Mimic a faux red sable for oil painting, the Black Swan is also made by that same company, and it is a faux red sable brush, so it's all synthetic as well. Now I'm going pretty strongly here with these warmer reds, and what I did, I used that same cool red that I had used on the skin tone, but when I add it with the yellow ochre and a little burnt sienna, I can get that warmer tone for the reddish parts in the shadow and in the blush and on the lips. So just because you're starting off with a cool undertoned color doesn't mean it has to stay cool undertoned depending on what you mix it with. And I think if you keep a limited palette, which I really have here, there's green on my palette from before. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to waste that. I'll use it on something. I didn't use the green in this painting, but it's on my palette because it was from a previous painting and I thought I might use it up. So the full color palette that I used here, I used ultramarine blue, I used burnt sienna, I used a quinacridone rose. It's the cool red in that kit. I used a yellow ochre. And I think that's it. Because the red and the blue makes a beautiful purple because it is a cooler red. And the burnt sienna and the brown make a beautiful dark gray shadow color when I need it, just by varying how much blue. I can have a more black or gray color. If I put more brown in it, I can have a warmer, more brown color. I'm adding some sun to her face by putting in some yellow ochre. Now keep in mind, when you're using really wet washes, you're going to have a big shift when it dries. It's going to dry a lot lighter. When you're using your paint fairly dry, fairly pasty, it's not going to shift so much. So I know it can be a little scary when you're doing a portrait to put down like what looks like a lot of color, but it's really not. If you're using a lot of water in that color, you can expect a greater drying shift. And that's with any watercolor. That's just a general rule of thumb with watercolors. That's why when you do your landscapes and you're really wetting that background and you're putting in your blues for the sky and you lift off your clouds or whatnot, and then it dries, it's so much lighter. That's why most instructors will say, do it a little darker, go a shade or two darker than what you want, because once it's dry, then you'll have a color that's just about right. And honestly, I thought about leaving it like this. I thought about going further with more details. You can do as much or as little as you want. I mean, this is just a practice piece in my sketchbook. I'm not being too fussy with it. I just wanted to, basically play around. Now I am going in with some darker brown. I am adding a little bit of a rim around the iris because her eyes were quite like kind of like a lighter amber color in the center and had a darker brown ring on it. So I wanted to do that. And I also wanted to add a little bit of the lashes, a little hint for the lashes. I didn't want to go too crazy with detail here because, I don't know, I just wanted a really loose look to it. I wanted it to be very, and I didn't achieve the look that I was going for, because I did kind of in my mind have envision this kind of like splashy, really nondescript, or not maybe nondescript. I guess I was thinking in my mind I would have this a lot more smushy and kind of fading off into the ether. But I haven't done a portrait like this or a figure like this in a few months, so it's I guess I'm a little rusty. I was also probably a little rusty because I'd been doing a lot of botanical type pen and ink work for my freelance project I'd been working on. So this was much looser than what I had been doing there. So I guess I needed a break from that, but I guess I didn't go as loose as I had wanted to. But that said, I mean, I think it's fine. Not a bad way to finish up a sketchbook. And when I'm working in the sketchbook, a watercolor sketchbook, especially where it's got this has 90-pound paper, so it's not really thick watercolor paper, so the paper does kind of buckle a bit. I only like to work on one side of the page as far as like doing an actual finished piece. On the other side, I might do swatches, or I might just kind of sketch out some notes, or sometimes I'll go back through a sketchbook and just kind of doodle on the opposite pages. And the reason for that is because sometimes I really like the work that I do in my sketchbook, and I thought maybe someday I will cut it apart and like frame some of the pieces. And I often get people ask me if they could buy different things in my sketchbook, and I usually say no. And one reason is because I might not be prepared to cut up a sketchbook yet, but the other reason is oftentimes, not in the case of this because these Lucas paints are light fast, but in some cases I'm using kind of dodgy materials in my sketchbook because it's my sketchbook. It's not going to be exposed to light. It's not going to hang on the wall, and so I don't worry about that. Here I'm just using the white from the pan of the Lucas paints, and it can really kind of pull out a little bit of a creaminess or a highlight to the skin, which is really nice. So I do like to use that for that purpose. You can also use that as a mixing white. So if you want to make a color pastel without really making it opaque, you can do that with those with the mixing white that's in this set. Or if you have a watercolor set with a white in it, that's generally what the white is for. It's for making pastels, because sometimes if you have to water down a bright color enough to make it as light as you want, it becomes so liquid that you can't control it. So by adding the white, you actually control the viscosity of it without adding a lot of opacity. And I love to do this white on the skin because it adds a reflection, but it's not super shiny. It just gives like that soft sheen of the light, just kind of like brushing the face, and it gives it kind of like a peaches and cream type feeling to it, especially if it's a lighter skin tone like this. So I just wanted to clarify the use of white because it's kind of controversial. I never used to use white before, but then the decades on in my painting journey, I realized I don't have to just not use it because people tell you shouldn't use it. Use it intentionally, and you're fine. And don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't use. I mean, obviously, if you're taking a class and you're trying to get something from the way the instructor paints, follow what they're saying. But then, on your own, make your own intentional decisions about what you want to put in your artwork, because your artwork is your artwork, and it needs to look like your vision and not like anybody else's. So. So keep that in mind. Don't feel like you have to follow any dogma when it comes to any media. I love doing mixed media work, and I think I'm doing much more mixed media work now than I ever did. Back when I used to teach art for a living, I taught straight oils, I taught straight watercolors, and I taught drawing, and it was like very, very traditional. There was no white in the watercolor. There was, it was definitely more of a traditional approach to watercolors where white of the paper and that's that. But as I've kind of branched out over the years and not necessarily been working one-on-one with students, I've definitely developed my own style that I prefer to work in. And you develop yours too, and you decide what mediums you like, what you want to add to your painting, what you want to omit, and it's completely fine. There's really no art police that's gonna come knocking at your door saying, I want to see your white tube of gouache. Did you use that on your watercolors? That's not allowed. Of course that's not going to happen. Now in a minute we'll zoom out and you'll be able to see a little bit more of what I'm doing here in the sweater. I was basically just wanting to put a little bit more detail. It's kind of like a hard balance. It's like trying to figure out how much detail do I want to add to this? How much do I want to leave it kind of nondescript and ethereal? And I gotta say, for the longest time, the hand was really bothering me. And I was thinking, her hand is too big. Her hand is too big. And maybe it is, but maybe it isn't, because she's kind of resting towards the back of her hand. Her hand is in front. There would be a little bit of distortion there. So I haven't decided or not. But I was definitely thinking her hand is way too big, like right after I painted it. But now I'm not so sure. Now I think it might be fine. I think it's a tendency that we have to draw the hands too small. And And I was drawing what I saw, and I think I was being fairly accurate. I don't know. Who knows? She needs freckles. She needs freckles. That's all I can say. One thing I'm noticing though is that shadow next to the hand doesn't seem so dark anymore, does it? It seems like it goes a little bit better now that we have that, the contrast of the shadows in the sweater and we have the other layers on the skin. It definitely feels a lot more balanced and a lot more like it fits and belongs. So that's another reason I like to go in and get those darks right off the bat, because it helps establish what's my lightest light and what's my darkest dark. Now I did decide that I wanted to have a darker background, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do that at the first, because honestly when I first started I was almost thinking that there would be colors just kind of whooshing off into the background, but apparently I forgot, or I decided to go a different route. I was painting very intuitively. I think I was listening to an audiobook. I was just kind of like chilling out and just zoning out and putting paint to paper. And I thought, oh yeah, let's do a dark background. Let's see how that looks. Let's get that nice contrast in there. Since her skin is very pale, I thought that would be a really nice look. And for that, I actually did grab some Payne's Gray. So I did add one more color to the mix, but I can go in and add that in the hair. I can add that in the eye. I can add that in the lashes, or like the pupil of the eye. So when you do go in, if you do decide to go in and do something different like that and pull in another color, you want to add it other places. Like here, I'm like, well, now that I'm looking at that with that dark background, I think my shadow right around the fingers could be a little bit darker. And you're always going to be adjusting, especially if you do something big like change the background. And oftentimes if I know I'm going to have a background, it's the first thing I put in. But in this case, I was just painting intuitively. I wasn't really thinking that much. I was just kind of feeling. I was painting by feel. I guess it's like playing by ear. You paint by feel rather than planning it out. And that's another reason why this wasn't a live narrated tutorial, because I was just going for it intuitively. I needed to think things through. I needed to make decisions as I went, and I find that kind of difficult to do if I'm trying to talk at the same time. So I hope you don't mind that. I hope you enjoy it regardless. Now I'm throwing in those little flyaway hairs. I love flyaway hairs in a portrait, especially if it's a young person, because I think it looks so charming and innocent and very unaware, that kind of like need not to be completely polished. I think it's a very youthful look. So I'm throwing those in, and I'm just kind of refining just little areas where I feel like I need a little definition. Like the hand is really the closest thing to the viewer. It's slightly in front of the face. Like the chin is kind of like rested on right over the thumb on the back portion of the hand. So I wanted to make sure that those details were nice and sharp. And I also wanted to make sure I had some sharp details in the eyes. And so I'm using a gel pen to do that. And this is funny because I'm using the number 10 Arteza gel pen. And these pens are so weird. Sometimes they do not work, they skip, and then other times they work like a charm. So they're very similar to the Jelly Roll pens. Just to let you know that any of the issues I've had with the Artezas are also ones I've had with the Jelly Roll. The most dependable white gel pen I've ever used has been the Uniball Signo Broad. Yeah, Uniball Signo Broad. And because it's a nice thick one, it's kind of like this number 10. It might even be a little bit thicker, to be honest. And I also use a Posca white pen quite frequently as well. But I just haven't had the clogging issues with the Uniball like I have with the Jelly Roll or the Arteza. But anyways, it worked in this event, and I thought it was great for the flyaway hair. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It was a lot of fun. It was just what I needed after a kind of a busy, stressful week of a lot of freelance work, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Please give me a thumbs up before you go. Until next time, happy crafting.